Well, it was better than Suicide Squad. Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn was directed by Kathy Ann and written by Christina Hodson. The film follows Harley Quinn in the wake of her recent breakup with the Joker, and her eventual team up with Huntress, Black Canary and Renee Montoya to protect a young Cassandra Cain from the wrath of crime lord Black Mask. This movie's existence worried me, and the trailers did not put any of those thoughts to rest. So, did Birds of Prey, I'm not saying the full title every time, dig itself out of the hole that was left in the wake of Suicide Squad, or did it not learn from any of the mistakes of past DC movies? Well, I can't deny that this movie wasn't fun. Bright and colourful, with a focus on Harley Quinn as a protagonist, I think it has a far more coherent theme than Suicide Squad did. I think the wonky graphics also work more here than they did in that movie. The action was surprisingly good, and enhanced further by the absurd performances of Margot Robbie and Ewan McGregor. I think the rating was a good choice as well, as the movie was significantly more graphic than I thought it was going to be, which really turned up the dial on said action. The narration was an interesting choice. While initially worried as I was not a fan of how they used it at the beginning, I thoroughly enjoyed how they set up having Harley as an unreliable narrator. Except then they did nothing interesting with it. We already had Harley as a main character, so we already had enough of her personality as it was, so I thought that was extremely disappointing, particularly as the narration is used most of the time for crammed-in exposition that isn't actually that funny or as clever as they think it is. With that though, Margot Robbie owns her role as Harley Quinn regardless, even more so than I think she does in Suicide Squad. However, while she is super entertaining to watch, I think that's part of the problem. Why is this a Birds of Prey movie? 3 members don't actually team up until the very end, and even then, a lot of them are rather boring to watch, with only the humour saving their sorry lack of character development. The Montoya character especially, as everyone has seen the female cop who is undervalued and ignored decides to go out on her own trope. The casting for Black Canary was interesting, but Cassandra Cain was the worst offender when it came to adaptations. While not super familiar with the comic counterpart, I find it interesting that the film version is Cassandra Cain in name only. I won't get into it too much, but a quick Google of the original character will show you how different they are. With that said though, even without taking it into account, Cassandra is a walking plot device. Now sometimes that can work, but generally you should give the most crucial character to your story some actual personality. I initially liked the idea of a story on everyone out to kill Harley, but the movie ultimately wasn't that. Before I finish talking about the characters though, I'd be hard pressed not to talk about Ewan McGregor's Roman Sionis, aka Black Mask. I was excited for this performance, and Ewan did not disappoint. For the most part, the accuracy of the character it's based on is pretty decent, but I think what makes it okay is just how fun it is. It pissed me off a little how they seem to really distance Black Mask from his Batman origins, and think it would have been a lot more satisfying to have this Black Mask be a far more established character in universe. I previously mentioned some lack of character development. However, when looking closely, I think it's more so that the character development we do get seems very underdeveloped and undeserved. Most of the characters, minus Harley and Cassandra, never really speak to one another until the end of the film, so when they suddenly join forces, it's almost jarring. Seeing as this is an origin for a team of superheroes, you'd think they'd take a note from films like The Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, and hell, even Justice League. The general premise of these films is it's about all of these characters learning to work together and overcome their differences. While there are exceptions to this rule, where my dislike for Suicide Squad comes from, this film fails to actually make us care enough about the other characters, and a single scene at the end to make them more friends just seems a little wonky and unjustified. I feel obliged to talk about the music as well, seeing as its use in Suicide Squad is generally agreed to be silly and far too on the nose. This movie cleans it up a bit, with music not being thrown at you with every character introduction, and seems to fit the tone of the film reasonably well. That being said, a lot of its uses detract from scenes in the film, and while used more sparingly, still is not as smart as the movie might want it to be. The story itself is serviceable, but there was really nothing interesting here. I enjoyed having the protagonist being mostly responsible for everything in the plot going forward though, whether Harley intended for it to occur or not. The pacing was all over the place, especially in the beginning. and while the film's excuse is due to the narration of Harley, it doesn't really justify its existence, and I think the script would have needed a rewrite or two to solidify a proper structure. With that, I think one of the more impressive achievements of this film is, as a superhero movie, it tries its best to explore an actual issue. For a film that wants to look at misogyny, this was probably the best one to do it with. I think it generally hits the beats it wants to well enough, although I'm not sure how successful I'd say it is by the end at actually doing something interesting with that. Birds of Prey is a colourful mess of a movie. It has fun characters, and even more fun performances, with action that has been some of the most violent and enjoyable in the DCEU. Unlike other superhero movies, this one actually tries to explore a real concept, and I think for the most part it's harmless and does not detract from the story because, well, it is the story. It does have some misgivings though, with an overuse of external music that gets old really quickly and doesn't add a significant amount to the impact of certain scenes. The primary flaw though is its use of the characters, with Harley Quinn feeling like the only one of some interest and having actual development. The rest take a back seat and their arcs are shoehorned in at the end to make the title of the film feel justified.
You blow up,